So here's the thing about being a healer in Valdrich's kingdom. People don't call you a healer like it's a blessing. They say it like it's a warning, like you're a walking omen. And me, I'm Vera. I'm the kind of healer they whisper about. The cursed kind. The kind that takes pain into her own body. And I didn't choose that. All right. It chose me. It clung to me like smoke you can't wash off. And the village I came from, they didn't throw stones every day. Not anymore. They just did that thing that's worse. They looked through me like I was already dead, and when someone needed saving, they'd knock on my door at midnight, and when the fever broke, they'd run away before sunrise so they didn't have to say thank you to a cursed girl. Then one day the king's riders came, armor shining like they owned the sun. And they didn't ask politely. They didn't even pretend. They said, "By order of King Valdrich, you will come." And I said, "If I refuse?" And the captain looked at me like he was bored, like he'd practiced this line. "Then we drag you, and we still get what we came for." And I knew right then it wasn't about my freedom, it was about my usefulness. They brought me to the fortress that's built half into a mountain, the kind of place where the stones feel like they remember screams. And I smelled it before I saw it, that heavy, bitter, metallic smell like burned blood and old thunder, and I heard it too, this slow breathing that wasn't human. It made the air vibrate. It made my teeth ache. And I kept walking anyway because that's what you do when fear doesn't feed you a choice. King Valdrich met me with that steady look rulers have, not cruel, not kind, just measuring. And he said, "You know why you're here." And I said, "I can guess." And he didn't smile. He just nodded toward the great doors and he said, "Synindrath is dying." Now people tell stories about Synindrath like he's a storm that learned how to take a shape. The legendary dragon bound to the crown, protector and executioner. And I thought I was prepared. I really did. But then those doors opened, and I saw him, and every story I'd ever heard suddenly felt like a child's drawing compared to the real thing. His scales weren't just black. They were black like deep water where light goes to drown. And there were veins of silver in them like cracks in ice, and his eyes, listen. His eyes weren't mindless predator eyes. They were old eyes. Tired eyes, eyes that had watched empires rise and rot, and still kept watching. And he was lying there like a fallen mountain, chest barely rising, and the air around him shimmered like it didn't know how to behave. They told me 6 healers had tried and died. Some from shock, some from poison, some from whatever curse was eating him alive. And I looked at Valdrich and said, "You brought me here to die too." And he didn't deny it, he just said, "I brought you here because you're the only one who might live long enough to succeed." I stepped closer, and the heat coming off Synindrath felt wrong, like fever from something ancient, and his breath smelled like frost and ash at the same time, and I could feel it under my skin. The poison in him, it wasn't just venom, it was something made to kill legends. Something designed for a creature that shouldn't be able to die. Synindrath's eyelid twitched, slow, like stone moving, and his gaze found me, pinned me, and I swear I felt him in my head without words, like a pressure, like a thought that wasn't mine, and it was basically, "Why are you still here?" I swallowed and I spoke out loud because humans need sound to feel brave. "Because if I run, you die. And if you die, they'll burn my village looking for someone to blame." And I didn't know if he understood, but his nostrils flared, and that was something like a laugh. Except it wasn't amused. It was bitter, the court mage whispered behind me. "Do not touch the wound with bare hands." And I said, "I'm not touching the wound. I'm touching the pain." And that's when everyone went quiet because they all knew my curse. Now, here's what they don't tell you about absorbing pain. You don't just take the sensation, you take the story inside it. You take the fear, the rage, the helplessness. You take the echo of whoever suffered first. And the moment I opened myself to Synindrath, it was like plunging into a sea made of knives. My vision went white at the edges. My knees wanted to give out. But I held on because I've held on before. I placed my palms in the air just above his chest, not touching his scales. And I let my curse do what it does best. The poison fought me like it had teeth. It rushed up my arms. It burned through my veins. It tried to claim me. And for a second, I almost heard the other healers screaming through time, like their deaths left a stain in the air, and my heart stuttered, and I thought, okay, this is it. And then I did something I promised myself I'd never do again. I used forbidden magic. Not the flashy kind. The quiet kind that bends rules so softly you only notice when it's too late. I made a vessel inside me, a sealed place, and I pulled the poison into it like dragging a star into a jar. It hurt so much I tasted iron. My hands shook. Tears ran down my face without permission. But Synindrath's breath changed. His chest rose fuller. His eyes sharpened. The fever heat eased, and the air around him stopped trembling like panic and started trembling like power returning. I collapsed to one knee. My body felt like it had been hollowed out and filled with glass. Everyone stared like they'd watched a miracle and didn't know whether to clap or pray. Synindrath lifted his head just enough that the wind of it pushed my hair back, and his voice, his actual voice, rolled over me like thunder, choosing to speak human words. "You are bleeding on the inside," he said. I wiped my mouth and saw blood on my sleeve and laughed, because sometimes you laugh so you don't scream. "Yeah," I said. "That's kind of my thing." He stared at me like I was a riddle he'd waited centuries to solve. Then he said, calm as a verdict, "You will not be discarded." Valdrich stepped forward, cautious, respectful, like even a king knew where his power ended. "Synindrath," the king said. "She saved you." Synindrath's gaze didn't leave me. "She did more than that," he said. "She chose pain." And then, like it was the simplest decision in the world, the dragon said, "I choose her." Everyone froze. The courtiers blinked like they'd misheard. The court mage's lips parted. Valdrich's voice lowered. "Choose her. For what?" Synindrath's jaw shifted, and I felt the weight of destiny settling like a chain I didn't ask for. "For my mate," he said. "For my queen." I almost choked. "Excuse me?" Synindrath's eyes narrowed slightly, and if a dragon can look offended, he did. "You would prefer to return to those who fear you," he said, "and die slowly alone." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out because the truth hit hard. I had never been offered belonging, not once, not without payment in pain. Valdrich looked at me, and there was something like relief in his face, because this solved his political problem and his dragon problem at once, and that was when I realized I might have walked out of one cage straight into another. Synindrath lowered his head closer to me, not touching, but near enough that I felt his warmth, and he said quietly, "You do not have to love me today. You only have to live." And the poison inside my sealed vessel pulsed, like it was laughing, like it was waiting, so they didn't ask me again after that. Once a dragon says mine, the world rearranges itself around the word. They dressed me in silk that felt like lies. They gave me rooms with windows that looked out over cliffs. As if a pretty view could replace freedom, they bowed to me. But not because they respected me. No, because they were terrified of the creature who had claimed me. And Synindrath, he kept his distance. Not because he didn't care, because he didn't know how to be near without being dangerous. When he spoke, servants fled. When he moved, guards gripped spears they knew wouldn't matter. And when he looked at me, it was like being studied by a storm, deciding whether to spare a village. The first night I slept in the royal wing, I woke up choking. The poison vessel inside me had cracked just a little. A hairline fracture. Enough for darkness to leak into my blood like ink. I sat on the floor, shaking, pressing my palm to my chest, whispering the stabilizing spell like a prayer, and then I heard it. A low sound outside my door. Not footsteps, not human. A weight settling, a breath. I opened the door and there, coiled in the corridor like a living wall, was Synindrath, eyes half-lidded, watching. "You're guarding me," I said. "I'm listening," he replied. "For what?" "For the moment you stop breathing." I hated how my throat tightened. "That's a cheerful bedtime habit." He tilted his head. "You saved me," he said, like he was explaining a fact of nature. "So I will not fail you." I stared at him. "You don't even know me." I know you chose to suffer, he said. That tells me enough. That was our beginning. Not romance, not warmth, just two wounded creatures making an agreement with the night. In the days that followed, court life tried to swallow me. Ladies with smiles like knives came to welcome me, asking gentle questions that were really traps. Where did you learn your craft? Are you truly cursed? Do you hear voices when you heal? They wanted me to be either saint or monster, because if I was human, they'd have to face their cruelty. And then there was Lady Marroway. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. She had that kind of elegance that's really just practiced control, and her eyes were always calculating, like she could measure how much someone was worth without touching them. She bowed to me deeper than necessary. Your Grace, she said, sweet as honey. How fortunate we are that Synindrath found you. Found me, I repeated. Yes, she said, and her smile sharpened. Like one finds a rare tool. I felt Synindrath's presence behind me without turning. The air got heavier. Marroway noticed too, but she didn't flinch. That told me she was either brave or stupid, and I didn't think she was stupid. Synindrath's voice rolled in, calm, deadly. Speak carefully, Marrow. She lowered her gaze. Always, she purred. I only wish to ensure our kingdom remains. Safe. That word, safe. It sounded like a threat. Later, when the hall emptied, I said to Synindrath, She hates me. She fears you. He corrected. What's the difference? The difference, he said, is what she will do next. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. Because that night, I went to the shrine room where the old wards were carved into stone. I wanted to reinforce my poison vessel. I wanted to make sure I wouldn't crack and spill darkness into the palace. I lit candles, whispered the runes, and felt the magic settle. And then someone spoke behind me, soft, intimate. Healing yourself is forbidden, you know. I spun. Marroway stood in the doorway, alone. This is a private place, I said. She stepped in anyway. So is your body, she said, and smiled. Tell me, Vera, how much of Synindrath is inside you now? My stomach turned cold. What are you implying? I'm not implying, she said. I'm asking. Because if you've taken his poison, then you've taken a piece of his curse too. And if that breaks, it won't be you who dies first. It'll be everyone near you. That's not true, I snapped, but my voice shook because part of me wasn't sure. Marroway's eyes gleamed. You see, she whispered, fear is so useful. I didn't see her hand move. I just felt the spell strike like a needle. My chest seized. The poison vessel pulsed, angry, reacting, and a crack spread like lightning through glass. I dropped to my knees. Marroway crouched, close enough that I smelled her perfume. They'll blame you, she murmured. They always blame the cursed girl. And when Synindrath realizes you're a weakness, he'll do what dragons do. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. Then the candles blew out in one violent gust, and the room filled with a shadow bigger than night. Synindrath. Marrow stood quickly, face smooth, innocent. My lord, she said. I found her collapsed. I feared the curse. Synindrath didn't roar. He didn't burn. He just looked at her, and the silence was worse than fire. You touched what is mine, he said. Marroway's smile faltered. Your Grace. I was only... Synindrath's gaze flicked to me. Vera, he said, softer. Tell me the truth. I forced air in. She cracked it, I whispered. The vessel. Synindrath's eyes went ancient and cold. Leave, he told Marroway. She hesitated. That was her mistake. The stone floor beneath her feet fractured. Not from claws, not from flame, but from pressure, like the mountain itself agreed with the dragon. Marroway stumbled back, pale now. I said leave. Synindrath repeated, and she fled. Synindrath lowered his head near me. Can you hold it? I don't know, I admitted, voice raw. It's fighting. Then we share it, he said. I stared. That's not possible. It is, he replied. It is only dangerous. I laughed weakly. Everything about you is dangerous. And yet you're still here, he said. He pressed his forehead to mine, gently, like he was trying to remember how not to crush what he cared about. I felt heat, not burning, but living. I felt the poison vessel respond, like it recognized its original owner. The crack stopped spreading. I exhaled, shaking. Synindrath stayed there, forehead to forehead, and he said very quietly, I will not let them take you. And for the first time, I believed him. After that, the palace changed around me in tiny ways people pretended not to notice. Servants stopped, forgetting my meals. Guards stopped watching me like I might bite. Valdrich started inviting me into councils, not as decoration, but as someone whose opinion mattered because Synindrath would listen to me when he wouldn't listen to anyone else. Which, honestly, was terrifying, because I wasn't trained to be political. I was trained to keep children alive and stitch farmers back together after accidents. Court games felt like surgery without anesthesia. And Maraway? She didn't come at me directly again. She went for the things around me. She whispered to priests that I'd defiled the shrine. She told ladies that my curse was contagious. She told soldiers that a dragon's queen would eventually command the dragon against them. Fear, like she'd said, was useful. Synindrath tried to teach me how to stand in it without drowning. He'd speak in that steady voice and say things like, do not apologize when you enter a room. And I'd say, I'm not apologizing, I'm being polite. And he'd look at me like politeness was a strange human illness. We argued. A lot. Sometimes because he was controlling. Sometimes because I was stubborn. Sometimes because we were both terrified and didn't know how to say it. One night I told him, you chose me like a shield. And he replied, I chose you like a home. And the words hit me harder than any spell. Then came the festival of Ashlight, the night the kingdom celebrates surviving the old wars. Torches everywhere, music, vows, everyone pretending the past is safely buried. Valdrich wanted Synindrath to appear in human-adjacent form, the one he used for diplomacy, tall and broad, shouldered with eyes that still looked too old. Synindrath hated it. He said it made him feel like a lie. I said, do it anyway. He stared. You're becoming a queen. Don't sound so disappointed, I muttered. He leaned in slightly. I'm not disappointed, he said. I'm afraid. That was rare. Dragons don't confess fear, not unless it's real. At the festival, Marrow approached with a jeweled cup, smiling like she hadn't tried to kill me. To our future, she said. I didn't drink. I wasn't stupid. She laughed lightly. Oh, forgive me, of course you're cautious. Your curse must make you suspicious. I set the cup down. My curse makes me tired, I said. And tired people see clearer. Her eyes flashed. Careful, she warned softly. Synindrath appeared at my side like a shadow deciding to protect me. Maraway bowed and retreated, but I saw her glance at the musicians, and I felt something in my gut twist. Then the fireworks began. Bright, loud, distracting, and the wards around the palace flickered. I felt it immediately. Healers feel shifts in invisible things because our bodies are basically sensors for suffering. The air went thin, like a breath held too long. People laughed, unaware. Synindrath's eyes narrowed. Someone is cutting the wards, he said. No, we didn't move, because you said no transition descriptions, so I'll just tell you what happened. Suddenly, the laughter turned into screams because creatures poured out of the dark edges of the festival grounds. Not beasts, not wolves, but shadow things stitched from poison and old resentment. And they went straight for children first because cruelty always goes for what's smallest. I reacted without thinking. I grabbed the nearest kid, shoved him behind me, and I opened my curse like a door. Pain hit me like a wave. Claws, fear, broken bones. I absorbed what I could, and my knees nearly buckled. Synindrath's voice cut through it. Vera, stop, he snapped. I can't. I yelled. If I don't, he grabbed me gently, but firmly, and he said, if you take all of it, you die, and then they lose the only healer who can mend what comes after. I hated that he was right. Valdrich was shouting orders. Guards fought. Mages tried to stitch the ward lines back. It wasn't enough. Synindrath looked at me like he made a decision he didn't want to make. Hold on to me, he said. What? Do it, he demanded. I clutched his arm, and he let his true nature surge up, not fully transforming, but enough that his skin shimmered with scale light, enough that power thrummed in the air like thunder arriving. The shadow things hesitated. Synindrath spoke a word in the old tongue, and the ground answered. The creatures shrieked like they remembered being banished once before. But Merowe was on a balcony above, hands raised, lips moving in a spell that wasn't royal magic. It was older, nastier, and I realized in one clear flash, she wasn't just ambitious, she was the source. She was the poison that had been killing Synindrath. She'd fed it to him slowly over years, through offerings, through blessings, through political rituals. She'd wanted the dragon weak so she could control the crown, and now she was using the festival, the crowd, the chaos, to finish it. I let go of Synindrath and ran toward the stairs, yes. I know, no scene description, but you can feel the urgency, my chest burning, poison vessel pulsing, and Synindrath shouted my name like it hurt him. Merowe saw me coming and smiled. You're brave, she called, or suicidal. Both. I coughed, and I raised my hands. She hurled a spear of shadow straight at my heart, and I did what cursed healers do. I took it. It slammed into me, cold and screaming, and my poison vessel shattered. I screamed. The world narrowed to agony, and Synindrath's roar finally came, shaking the palace like an earthquake. But it wasn't rage alone. It was fear, raw and bright. When the vessel broke, it wasn't just poison spilling. It was everything I'd ever absorbed, every pain I'd carried, every fever, every broken bone, every dying breath I'd held inside me so others could walk away. It all rose up like a flood, and for one awful heartbeat I thought, this is how a curse ends. It doesn't kill you cleanly. It turns you into the thing everyone feared you were. Merowe leaned forward, eyes shining. Yes, she whispered, like she was listening to music. Let it out. Let them see what you truly are. I shook so hard my teeth clicked. My hands clawed at my own arms like I could tear the darkness out. People below were still screaming, still fighting the shadow things. And I realized if I lost control up here, I'd become another disaster in a night already drowning. Then Synindrath was there. Not as a man, not as a dragon fully, but as something in between. Power barely contained. Eyes blazing. He didn't attack Merowe first. He went straight to me. He grabbed my face, careful, so careful, and he said, "Breathe with me. I gasped. I'm breaking." "Then break into me," he said. That sounded impossible. That sounded like madness. Merowe laughed. "You'll kill him," she taunted. "Your curse will rot even a dragon." Synindrath didn't look at her. He only looked at me. "Vera," he said, "I chose you. That means I carry what you carry. Do you understand?" I choked out, "Why?" And he answered. So simply it made my chest ache worse than the poison. "Because you have carried everyone alone your whole life." He pressed his forehead to mine again. And this time it wasn't just warmth. It was a door opening inside my soul. I felt something ancient reach for me. Not to take, but to share. The darkness surged, then split. Like a river finding two paths. Half of it poured into him. Synindrath hissed through his teeth, a sound like stone cracking. His shoulders tensed. His eyes flickered, not with weakness, but with strain. "You idiot," I whispered, tears streaming. "I won't," he growled. "Not while you're with me." That was the bond. Not a spell with fancy circles. Not a priest's blessing. A decision. A shared weight. Merowe's smile disappeared. "No," she snapped, and she flung another spell, sharper, aimed at the bond itself. Synindrath finally turned his gaze on her, and the temperature dropped like winter stepping into the room. "You poisoned me," he said, voice deadly calm. Maraway lifted her chin. "I preserved the kingdom," she said. "A dragon is a threat, Synindrath. A queen like her is a disease. I did what had to be done. I found my voice again, shaky but real. You did what you wanted," I said. "And you used fear as a crown." Maraway's eyes narrowed. "Fear is honest," she spat. "Love is a weakness." Synindrath stepped forward, and his shadow stretched across her like a judgment. "Then you will be ruled by what you worship," he said. He didn't burn her. He didn't rip her apart. He did something worse. He stripped her spellwork away. He spoke the old tongue again, and the shadows she controlled snapped back like dogs released from a leash. But they didn't attack the innocent this time. They turned on the one who had fed them. Maraway stumbled back, suddenly terrified. No, wait. And I watched, heart pounding, as her own poison wrapped around her wrists, her throat, her chest, squeezing, not killing, just showing her exactly what she'd been doing to others. She fell to her knees, gasping. Valdrich arrived, guards behind him, mages trembling, and he saw Maraway collapsed, saw us bound forehead to forehead, saw the last of the shadow things dissolving like smoke, and the king's face went pale. "What have you done?" Valdrich whispered, not accusing, just stunned. Synindrath's voice was low. "What she forced," he said. Maraway coughed, voice ragged. "Your Majesty." "I can explain." Valdrich looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You'll explain at trial," he said. "And then this matters," Valdrich turned to me. To the cursed healer everyone feared, and he bowed his head, just slightly, like respect fighting centuries of prejudice. "You saved my kingdom," he said. I almost laughed. "I nearly destroyed it," I replied. Synindrath's hand tightened around mine. "Not alone," he said. "That night, after Mara was taken away, after the wounded were tended, after the festival torches burned down to ash, I sat on the floor of my room because beds felt too soft for someone who'd nearly cracked open reality, and Synindrath sat across from me, watching like he was afraid I'd vanish. I said, "You felt it, didn't you?" He didn't pretend. "Yes, all the pain I've held," I said. "It's in you now." He nodded once. And, are you angry?" He blinked, like the question was strange. "Angry at you for being what you are?" he asked. "No." "Then what?" I whispered. He looked away for a second, jaw tight, and when he looked back, his eyes were softer. "I'm angry," he admitted, "at a world that taught you to carry it alone." My throat closed. "I don't know how to stop carrying," I confessed. Synindrath leaned forward, voice rough. "Then we learn," he said. Together, and for the first time since childhood, I slept without waiting for the next knock at midnight. The trial wasn't loud like people expect. No shouting, no dramatic confessions. Maraway didn't beg. She sat straight, hands folded, like dignity could protect her from consequences. Valdrich listened. The nobles listened. The priests listened. And I stood beside Synindrath because if I stood alone, they'd remember how easy it used to be to fear me. Maraway tried to twist it. Of course she did. She said the dragon was too dangerous. She said my curse was a threat. She said she acted for the kingdom. Then the court mage produced the evidence. The poisoned offerings, the corrupted ward scripts, the ledger of bribes, the testimonies of healers she'd recruited and discarded. One by one, her lies collapsed. And here's the thing about karma in a kingdom built on fear. It doesn't always come as a lightning bolt. Sometimes it comes as everyone finally seeing you clearly and realizing you're small. Valdrich's voice was steady. "You are guilty," he said, "and you will be stripped of title, lands, and influence. You will live," he added, and Maraway's eyes flickered like relief. "But you will live powerless, and you will spend your days healing the very people you taught others to despise." Maraway's face twisted. "That's cruelty," she hissed. Valdrich's gaze sharpened. "No," he said, "that is consequence." She looked at me then, hatred burning. "You'll regret this," she whispered. I met her eyes, calm. "Maybe," I said, "but not the way you mean. Because here's what happened. Meroe was sent to the border villages where plague and poverty lived, and she was forced to work under the guidance of the healers she'd mocked, and every day she had to touch suffering with her own hands, and every day she had to learn that fear doesn't cure anything. It only spreads." Meanwhile, Valdrich changed the law. He did it publicly, in the great hall, with the crown on his head and the dragon at his side, and he said, "Healers are under royal protection. No healer will be hunted. No healer will be exiled. No curse will be used as an excuse to commit cruelty." People murmured. Some were angry. Some were relieved. Most were confused, because when a world runs on fear, compassion feels like a foreign language. Synindrath spoke too, which stunned everyone. Because dragons don't make speeches. Dragons make history. "If you harm a healer," he said, "you harm the kingdom's heartbeat." And then he turned to me, right there in front of everyone, and he asked, "Vera, will you stand with me?" My mouth went dry. I thought about my village, about the midnight knocks, about being used and thrown away. I thought about the poison still shared between us, the bond that meant I could feel his pain now too, the loneliness he'd carried for centuries. I said, "Yes." And my voice didn't shake. Our marriage wasn't a sparkling party. It was an oath. It was two wounded beings refusing to be weapons anymore. Synindrath didn't suddenly become gentle all the time. He was still blunt, still intense, still frightening when he wanted to be. And I didn't suddenly become fearless. I still flinched when crowds stared too long. But love wasn't fireworks. Love was mornings where he'd quietly ask, "How is your chest today?" And I'd answer honestly, and he'd breathe out like he'd been holding the world on his shoulders. Love was him letting me see his true form without intimidation, just presence, and me sitting near his massive claw and telling him stories of normal human things, like how bread smells when it's done, like how children laugh when they're not hungry. Love was me teaching him that protection doesn't always mean violence. And love was him teaching me that receiving care doesn't make you weak. The last test came when the poison tried one final trick. Because curses don't like being undone. They fight to stay relevant. One winter evening, the bond between me and Synindrath flared painfully, and I doubled over, gasping, feeling cold fire in my veins. Synindrath staggered too, eyes darkening, breath coming hard. The old poison wasn't just poison. It was a story, a spell story, written by fear. It wanted to prove its point, that love fails, that bonds break, that healers die, that dragons end up alone. Synindrath's voice was strained. "It's trying to separate us." I clenched my jaw. "Then we don't let it." We went to the shrine room again, not to beg gods, but to face what was left. The court mage offered elaborate rituals. Priests offered holy water. Valdrich offered guards. Synindrath dismissed them all with one look. "This is ours," he said. So it was just us. Two hearts. One curse. One choice. I sat on the stone floor, palms on my knees, breathing slow. Synindrath lowered himself in front of me, huge even in his restrained form, eyes fixed on mine. I said, "Remember when you told me I didn't have to love you today, I only had to live?" He huffed softly. "I remember." "Well," I said, voice hoarse, "today I love you, and I'm still going to live." Something in his gaze cracked open. Not weakness, tenderness. The poison surged, trying to flood us with old pain, old fear. I felt my childhood loneliness claw up. I felt the villagers' disgust. I felt the nights I thought, if I die, no one will notice until the smell reaches someone's door. Synindrath felt his own ghosts, too. I saw it in his eyes. Centuries of being used, feared, summoned like a weapon, praised only when he destroyed. We didn't fight the memories by denying them. We held them together. Synindrath pressed his forehead to mine, and we breathed, and we let the bond widen. Not just a thread, but a rope. Not just a rope, but a bridge. I whispered, "I don't have to carry it alone." And he answered, You never did. You were just never offered a hand. The poison screamed inside us, furious. It pushed, trying to tear. It tried to convince me I was unworthy. It tried to convince him he was dangerous. I spoke into that darkness like it was a person. You don't own me, I said. You're just what happened to me. Synindrath's voice layered over mine, deeper, older. And what happened, he said, will not decide what we become. Then the bond did the strangest, simplest thing. It turned pain into meaning, not instantly, not magically, but truly. The curse had been built on fear and isolation, on the belief that suffering must be solitary. Our bond rewrote that belief. The poison didn't explode. It dissolved, like salt in water. Like an old hate finally running out of breath, I inhaled, expecting agony, and instead I felt quiet. Synindrath blinked slowly, like he didn't trust it. Then he exhaled, a long breath that sounded like relief. I touched my chest. No pulsing vessel, no crack, no darkness rattling around. I laughed, soft, stunned. I'm free. Synindrath's eyes shimmered. And if you think dragons don't cry, you've never seen one who finally stops being alone. So am I, he said. After that, things didn't become perfect. Kingdoms don't heal overnight. Some people still feared me. Some still feared him. But the laws held. The king enforced them. The healers built a guild. Protected, funded, trained, and here's the none qua part. The cause and effect, the karma that makes the ending feel earned. The kingdom that once threw healers out started thriving because fewer died of sickness, fewer soldiers died of untreated wounds, fewer mothers died in childbirth. Compassion didn't weaken the crown. It strengthened it. As for Meroe, years later, I heard stories. She became quiet. She learned herbs. She stopped sneering at bandaged hands. People said she never smiled the same way again. And when a plague swept through the border villages, she stayed, treating the sick until her hands bled, because she finally understood what she'd tried to destroy. I visited once. Not to gloat. To see. She looked up at me. Older, thinner, eyes tired. Are you here to watch me suffer? She asked. I shook my head. No, I said. I'm here to see if you've learned. She swallowed hard. I was wrong, she admitted. Fear made me powerful. Love made you unstoppable. I didn't answer with a speech. I just handed her a pouch of rare healing resin from the mountain caves, and I said, then use it well. When I returned to the palace, Synindrath was waiting on the cliff terrace where the wind always tasted like sky, and he asked, did it bring you peace? I thought about it. It brought me closure, I said. Peace is something we practice. He stepped closer. Then practice with me, he murmured, and I leaned into him, not because I needed saving anymore, but because I wanted to be held. That's the kind of ending we got. Not a fairy tale ending where pain never returns, but a healing ending where pain doesn't rule the story. A cursed healer and a legendary dragon, choosing each other every day, and in doing so, changing a kingdom that used to think fear was the only way to survive. Because love, real love, doesn't erase scars. It teaches you not to be afraid of them. And you might think that with a child born under clear skies and enemies reduced to ash, the story would soften into lullabies and quiet years. But kingdoms do not drift into peace without being tested one last time. And fate, patient and exacting, always asks whether what was built in fire can endure without it. And it was in the second winter after the princess was born that the final trial arrived, not in the form of armies at the gate, or dark sorcery flaring from hidden towers, but in something far subtler and therefore more dangerous, doubt seeded among the people, because rumors began to circulate beyond the capital that the dragon had grown too close to the throne, that no human ruler should share power with an ancient creature of flame, that perhaps Veldaris had traded one form of dominance for another. And those whispers were not born of Satara's envy alone, but of old fears buried deep in the bones of men who do not like what they cannot control. Valdrich heard the reports from border provinces calmly, but I felt the tension coil beneath his composure, and Vera heard the unease in the voices of merchants and traveling healers long before any formal complaint reached the council. And one evening, when snow fell in soft, relentless sheets outside the keep, she stood before the great hearth with their daughter asleep against her shoulder and said quietly, "They're afraid of you." And she was not accusing, just naming truth, and I shifted where I lay across the stone floor, embers glowing faintly along my scales, and I answered with the honesty I had always given her. "They have reason," and she smiled faintly at that because I did not pretend to be harmless. And Valdrich stepped closer and said, "Fear can be guided or exploited." And he looked between us both. "We will not let it be exploited." So instead of tightening my presence around the throne as some advisors suggested, instead of roaring louder to remind the realm of my strength, I did something few dragons have ever chosen to do. I withdrew from constant visibility, not vanishing, not abandoning my bond, but returning to the high mountain sanctuary where my kind once nested before kingdoms rose beneath us. And when word spread that the holy dragon had taken to the peaks again, the murmurs shifted, because absence forces reflection more sharply than proximity ever can. And in my distance I watched not with eyes alone, but through the living threads that still bound me to Valdrich and Vera, and the child whose heartbeat had grown strong and steady. The final test came not from rebellion, but from nature itself. That winter storms grew violent beyond memory. Rivers froze too fast and too thick. Mountain passes collapsed under avalanches, and a sickness rode the cold winds through remote villages, not curse-born, but natural and relentless, and messengers rode through blizzards to reach the capital. And though I remained in the mountains, I felt the strain ripple through the kingdom like a tightening net, and Vera insisted on traveling to the worst-stricken regions despite council urging caution for the queen and mother of the air, and Valdrich did not forbid her because he understood that to cage her compassion would fracture the very foundation they had built, and instead he rode with her, leaving the princess under trusted guard. And I watched from the sky when they crossed frozen plains, small figures against white expanse, and I understood that this was the moment the people would truly decide what kind of rulers they had. Village after village they worked without spectacle, Vera drawing fever from children until her hands shook, Valdrich organizing supply lines and rebuilding collapsed shelters with his own gloved hands when manpower failed and they did not invoke my name to compel obedience. They did not threaten Dragonfire to hasten cooperation. They simply stayed until the worst had passed, and news of that spread faster than any rumor ever had, because deeds travel differently than whispers. Still, the storm worsened. One night, an avalanche tore down the mountainside toward a settlement where Vera and Valdrich had taken refuge, and I felt the tremor through stone long before human ears caught it. An instinct overrode distance, and I launched from the peak with wings slicing through snow-choked air, and as the white wall of destruction roared toward the village, I descended like a falling star, slamming into the earth between avalanche and homes. Wings unfurled to their full span, claws digging deep into frozen ground, and I breathed fire not to burn but to carve a channel through snow and ice, redirecting the crushing force around the clustered buildings, and the impact rattled my bones and sent shockwaves through the valley. But the homes held, and when the roar faded into silence broken only by wind, the villagers stared not at a tyrant but at a guardian who had placed his own body between them and ruin. Valdrich reached me first, boots sinking into churned snow, and he pressed a gloved hand against my flank, not commanding, not worshipping, simply steadying. And Vera came next, despite exhaustion, placing her palm against my scale as she had the first day in the dungeon. And through that contact, the circle reaffirmed itself. Dragon, king, healer, not dominance but alliance, and the villagers saw it clearly now, that whatever power flowed between us was not about control but protection. When the storm finally broke weeks later and clear skies returned, something fundamental had shifted across Veldaris, not because fear had vanished, but because it had been answered consistently with service rather than intimidation. And when we returned to the capital, not in triumph but in quiet relief, the people did not bow from obligation. They bowed from respect, freely given. Years passed more gently after that. The princess grew bold and curious, climbing my foreleg before she could properly read. asking questions about ancient battles and older mistakes. And I told her stories not only of glory but of pride that led dragons astray in ages before humans recorded history, because if she was to one day inherit the bond, she needed truth more than myth. And Vera continued her healing not recklessly but wisely, training others with similar gifts, so the burden would never again fall solely on one pair of hands. And Valdrich ruled with firm compassion, remembering always how close he had come to losing everything when power was twisted by envy. And on a summer evening, many years after ash scattered in the courtyard, when the princess stood tall enough to meet my lowered gaze without craning her neck, she pressed her palm to my scale once more and said, "I will protect them too." And I believed her, not because of prophecy, but because I had watched the soil from which she grew. So, if you ask how the story ends, it does not end with a roar alone or a crown set upon a head. It ends in continuity, in fields replanted where rot once threatened, in laws strengthened not by fear but by fairness, in a kingdom that learned the cost of jealousy and chose not to pay it again. And I still rise to the sky when needed, my wings cutting clean arcs against blue, my roar rolling across valleys, not as warning, but as reminder that strength without compassion decays, and compassion without strength falters, but together they endure. The curse that sought to destroy us became the forge that revealed us. Satara's envy consumed her as surely as flame consumed her body, and what was planted in malice returned to its source, while what was sown in sacrifice multiplied into generations. And that is the simplest law of all, cause and consequence woven tighter than any spell. And under that law Veldaris stands, dragon above, crown below, healer at its heart, and love not as weakness but as the fiercest fire of all.